This video was recorded at Kickstart Entertainment's Vancouver studio, located on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We acknowledge that this place, now known as Strathcona, has been home to the Coast Salish people since time immemorial, and that their cultures have shaped and remain an integral part of the community of East Vancouver and Strathcona today.
Well, thank you all for being here today. I'm so excited to get this discussion going on my life as a director. My name is Wendy Guerrero, and I am the head of inclusion and diversity with Kickstart Entertainment. And I'm also the president of the Bentonville Film Festival that Gina Davis founded back in 2015. And I want to introduce to you today my esteemed colleagues that I'll be chatting with. We have Colleen Holub, pronouns she, her. We have Kerr Holden, her pronouns are also she, her. And Ana Gusson with she, her pronouns as well. These are all directors from Kickstart here, and we are going to be talking about their journey as a director. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. Great. So breaking into a career in the entertainment industry is difficult sometimes, and it can be especially challenging for women or BIPOC creators or other people from underrepresented communities. How did you all break into the industry? And I know we've chatted earlier about all the unique paths that each of you have had, so I would really love to hear more about from each of you how you got into the industry and what was your path in.
Mine was quite by chance. I had been working as a legal secretary and for a few years in my early 20s, and I just didn't find it fulfilling and satisfying or challenging. And I'd always liked to draw and paint. I never stopped doing that as a child. And then by chance I saw an ad in the paper for artists to apply at an animation studio. And I just took my sketchbook as a portfolio, and I got hired as a self painter. And it opened up a whole new world to me that I really was not aware of at all. It never occurred to me, like, where did these cartoons come from that I watch every morning on TV? And I enjoyed it so much, and the people and the environment, that it motivated me to go to college and learn how to animate. And that's what I did. I was one of two female students in a class of 29, and but it was a great course, and I've been working in animation ever since.
Amazing.
I've been making movies and animation since I was a child, probably since I was 8. I've always been really obsessed with the moving image and just finding new ways of approaching it or working with it or tailoring it. So I got my start really, really early, and I just taught myself animation and filmmaking throughout my teenage years, so that by the time I was 18, I had a pretty good bed of skills under me. And particularly in the field of editing, I got a lot of early experience and kind of showed some early proficiency in that. And at the time, when I moved to Vancouver, there was a big demand in 3D animation for individuals who understand animation but can also approach it cinematically, because now being in more 3D worlds, a lot of those sort of rules or formalities sort of started to cross over into the medium. So yeah, just people, they were really looking for people who could tell a story cinematically or understood how movies flowed in that third dimension. And I was just seen as a good candidate for forming stories that way. And I got an early start as a senior editor in a local studio here, and I've just been working in the industry ever since.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was the same as Kerr. Started very early on as a kid, doing quirky little things on my own, but it was hard to break into a career, so I got into graphic design. But even in graphic design school, it felt like a stronger force really pulling me into it. So I was always around the filmmaking people. So I started working with them, started working in freelancing with live action projects. Eventually, I got into an animation studio to help out with art direction, and that kind of felt like a nice full circle moment where I can bring design ideas into this and really create something unique with animation. So I decided to study it further, and that's what brought me to Canada. So I studied here for a year, and after that I got hired and then never left Canada. Yeah, it was, it was eventually, I feel like animation kind of came around as a full circle idea for me, so that's kind of how I broke into the industry.
Nice. And what was your first job as a director? As the lead director of a project?
Professionally?
Yeah.
It was through the program with Women in Animation.
Okay.
Where we got to work in a short film for ourselves, and so it's all owned by the women that are selected for the program. That was my first time directing professionally.
And what about you, Kerr?
In animation or
in
live
animation.
In animation specifically, probably would have been in about 2015. One of the shows I was working on had a series of short supplementary segments that went with it, just cute little tunes that they'd either put on YouTube or would play after the main body of the show. And I was really chomping at the bit to try and get a chance to direct animation and apply some of my filmmaking skills there. So the director that I was working with just very caringly let me handle those little episodes and segments, and just been doing it ever since then. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Well, and Colleen, what was your first director's job in animation?
I think it was, I had been, working at a studio, and they asked me to develop, they wanted to develop some of their own intellectual properties. And so they asked me to come up with ideas, and they had an idea as well for a show about a little girl. And I think that's why they had me develop it, because I don't think most of the other properties that they had in mind were male-based or for boys. And so they thought, okay, well, let's see what a female or what a woman has to offer. And so I developed this show, and then they asked me to direct it when it got picked up.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I wanted to just touch a little bit on what you were saying, Colleen, in terms of women being more represented in the director space. And just looking at some of the statistics before this panel, I was just getting acquainted again with, the startling statistics that just continue to keep going on. And with 50% of women as the moviegoer audience, they're in the last 2019 in the top 100 grossing films, there was only 10.7% of women directing those films, which I thought was pretty shocking and continues to stay shocking. So I was just curious for each of you, how do you feel when you got that first director's job, and was it ever a moment where you felt so excited to be a woman or someone identifying as a woman in this leadership role? And what type of qualities did you bring to that leadership role, and what was your style, or how did you find your style? And did you ever try to emulate a more of a masculine style, since that's really what the role models were and still are kind of for the director position in live action and in animation? And you're nodding your head, Ana. I'll go with you first, possibly.
Yeah, I really identify with that, the emulating part. When I first started directing on this Women in Animation project, I felt felt really great because I've always felt a bit underused by the roles I was. Like, yes, I know I can do a good job in animation, but I was not feeling like, satisfied or fulfilled because I felt very isolated. I wanted to be connecting with people and collaborating with people. So getting to be on the director role is like, oh, this is my chance to actually exercise this and try it out. So it really felt great to be able to be there and hear everybody's ideas and try to bring it into the film. At first, I felt I tried to emulate that place of like, there's a myth that the director has to have all the answers and have the vision, have like everything in his head, and I'm like, but I'm not quite that person. So at first I tried to bring it that way and be more assertive and be very like a strong presence. But then very quickly I noticed like, no, this is not working out. We have to sit back and reassess and see a better way to deal with this. So slowly finding out that collaboration and giving the project space to breathe, and everyone like finding ways to create a safe environment for everyone to bring out their ideas and not feel judged was definitely the best approach. So the film ended up being a great like, it's a very collective effort. Like, I can see, like, while I'm watching it, I can see everyone's ideas, like, oh, that was this person, that was another person, and how it played well together. So I'm very proud of that. And, like, even if it was, like, a process coming into it, I'm glad that, I finally got to exercise it and realize that, there's a better way of working things out.
And what about you, Kerr?
Do you mind reframing the question a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. What is your director style, and when did you find that style worked for you? And did you ever try to emulate anyone else's style, just thinking that this, as you started out as a director, and like, how did you find that style that works for you?
I feel like, I think like I mentioned earlier with my start into directing, started at like a very young age. So I feel like the style of my directing or filmmaking or image making started from there, and is definitely influenced by a lot of film history or film movements. I've always been really excited about the collaborative potentials that exist in art, less the idea of specifically manufacturing an image, and more this idea of manufacturing environments for images to be made. That's something that's always just been very appealing to me. So I've spent a lot of time as a youth studying old production models or production models from like different movements, whether they be from underrepresented people or more revolutionary movements of filmmaking, or new wave movements of filmmaking, or even silent era modes of like production. And I felt just very inspired by the different ways throughout history that different people over the world have brought people together or got them to collaborate under different circumstances. So I feel like a lot of my style is informed by that, and it's essentially crystallized into me. I'm someone who likes to provide people the parameters of like a world or a universe to then go and create in. I like to give people really definite sort of like shapes or feelings or like tones to work with, and sort of build the mythic or intellectual properties of the film or cartoon or whatever it may be we're producing, and let them explore and find themselves in it. I find the more just mystery or individuality that we can bring to cinema or these really large mediums, the more audiences respond with them and the more magical they feel. So a lot of my directing is just based on that, just inspiring how people define like the specific magic within whatever we're making.
And you, Colleen, where did you find your style as a director? And did you ever try to emulate someone else that you thought was, this is how you do it? Or, we always have these sort of, I call them see it, be it moments where you if you don't see somebody doing that you want to do out in the world, you never really kind of go out there and grasp that in a lot of ways, or it might take longer if you don't see an example out there in the world doing something that you were thinking about doing. So as a director, how did you straddle that, especially as a woman?
I think I didn't have any female role models as creative leads. So I did try to sort of emulate what I saw in the studios that I worked at. And it didn't work for me. Again, it didn't feel natural. It didn't fit the command control sort of, and not that everybody that I worked with had that sort of directing style, but I felt a little bit of pressure that, you know, the buck stops with me. I have to have all the answers. I have to know what to do and when to do it, and it's. I guess I just developed it over time. What worked, what didn't work, and eventually I found that for me personally, I needed to trust my team, and I found that in order for me to trust them, I had to have them trust me. And the reason for trust is so that people feel feel comfortable and the confidence to pitch crazy, you know, seemingly stupid ideas to solve, you know, creative solutions, right? And if you don't have that confidence and trust, then you can't really be creative, and you can't really, because nothing kills creativity more than fear of failure, right?
Right.
And so that's when I started to say, okay, no, for me, I think it's all about collaboration and about opening up to my team and saying, you know, what do you think? And yeah, it's true, eventually somebody has to make the decision, you know, which way is it going to go? But you want everybody to bring their best ideas and their most fun ideas to a project. That anything that has to do with animation is typically, you want it to be fun, and the people who are working on it and coming up with these ideas, they need to be enjoying what they're doing, and I think that all comes with trust and collaboration.
And the tone that you set going into the project as a director and as the leader of the project, that makes a lot of sense.
I was really inspired by something you said there about just the sources of inspiration, and noticing that around you is mostly male dominated, and sort of the forces that brought on that just sort of inspired just to think about a bit more of my history of like inspiration, and that like, there was in teaching myself as like a young person, like most of the available models or forms of teaching were male dominated or through male lens, and how that never felt right. And it was via like looking through fields or modes of cinema just generated by underrepresented people, in a lot of cases women, how that just brought so many more models of compassionate image making forward, and how that was like just like a great source of inspiration as a young person looking beyond the like immediate industry and like what it had to offer.
There's kind of a mind-blowing moment that like, oh wait, fear and intimidation doesn't take us very far. Like, interesting. Maybe there's another way around this.
Oh my gosh, And what about, you know, as you were saying, Colleen, it is a lot of pressure. I mean, you're putting together something, you have a client that's got to be delivered on time and sell eventually and all of that. I mean, how do you deal with the pressures of this industry, and what are some of the self-care tactics or things that you all go to sort of stay reinvigorated and stay inspired and ready to have the energy for that next project? Are there some, you know, mental health challenges for having all of that pressure, and also being as a leader in the industry, like that we said was very male dominated, you know, having the pressure of all of the other maybe underrepresented people's kind of on you, like I have to do this well or else I might not get hired again, or someone else that looks like me or is like me might not get hired again, like kind of paving the way, you know, for the future. Anybody have anything to share there?
I think one of the advantages of filmmaking or image making being such like a part of my life from like an early point, as well as it being such like a self-generated practice I've developed, that I feel like no matter what, I'm going to make movies, and that no one can really tell me not to do it or stop me from doing it. And so that just helps take a lot of like the pressure away. Yeah, of just like, like if you don't like it, that doesn't matter. I will wake up and do it again, just out of like a force of nature almost. And I also kind of put a lot of just sort of weight in the amount of, especially for children's content or cartoons, how much it is for a client, but they are not like the audience essentially, and how the true impact that I am aiming for is on a group of people that I won't see, or that I won't see their interaction with it. And so I can kind of like place a lot of, or maybe displace a lot of like the pressures that seem immediate from clients, and sort of like trade them in with this like more imaginary, hopeful image of children just like really loving like what we're making. So all of those things really help. I do think there is like a lot of pressure, especially like for directors. There's a lot of social pressure. There's a lot of time in front of people. You spend a lot of time talking to people, and I think like Colleen was saying, you spend a lot of time sharing stupid ideas. So there's definitely like those elements, but I think as long as you can find channels that allow you to believe in yourself and believe in your own image making. I find personally having a practice on the side where I do have space just to make my images and my own gives me a lot of confidence. So I just think the more you can, being a director is selfless, but you still have to have an amount in which you believe in yourself and like really prioritize believing in your ability.
I think for myself, like we're obviously biased here, but the environment that we found here in the studio of being so supportive behind us directors, that they really believe in what we're doing, and this confidence and saying like if I don't believe in something, I'm not going to present it to the client. I'm not going to even show this as a possibility for them, because I don't really believe in that. And I feel that the studio supports that thinking process. So a lot of it, comes from that. Like, if I don't really feel that this is going to be compelling or interesting for the audience, why should we bring this forward? So there's some ideas sometimes that clients sometimes put the pressure to really deliver. So we're just trying to make this in-between place of like, what do we want to put out in the world, right? So there is a lot of pressure, but being in this in a place that supports your creative voice, and your judgment, like your sense of judgment, it's really important. So really just feeling really grateful for being in a studio that has that kind of system in place.
I think it's good to remind ourselves that that's why they hired each of us. Because they want our opinions and they want our outlook on the project, and they want what each of us can bring, our own skill set and qualities, what that can offer to the team and to the property that we're working on. I try to remind myself that, or I try to avoid the us and them, like the clients and us, that, I try to think of it more like we're both, we all want the same thing. We all want it to be entertaining. We want it to be funny. We want it to be something we can be proud of and that we enjoy watching. So when I think of it in those terms, it's not so difficult. And I think that the other things that they might push for are things that may not be within scope in our production schedule and budget, and that's when I go to my producer and say, or my production manager and say, okay, is this within scope? Can we really do this? And that's an easy answer, then it's sort of taken off my shoulders, and it's not a creative question anymore. But for the creative questions, I try to focus on what's working, what's funny, what's entertaining, and if we are bringing all of that, then you really, how can you argue? You know?
And we talked earlier about having all the answers, or feeling like as you're stepping into this role, maybe for the first time for a lot of people listening, what is it that, like you talked about this myth of a director of having all the answers, what are some of the challenging points or the challenges that you all went through in your careers that maybe helped you see things differently or grow if you didn't have that moment of challenge, or if you weren't presented with a difficult situation that you had to overcome either creatively or through your team, helping, reaching out to your team, like you were saying? I think understanding how a director works with their production team too is really interesting for people coming into the industry for the first time, how those dynamics work. But for this question, maybe you can help sort of describe some scenarios that you were challenged by and overcame, or it turned into something that you never thought would work, but it actually did. Are there any of those moments that any of you want to share?
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind when you mentioned that is like not being afraid of being wrong, making mistakes. It's, as this comes up, like, oh, you have to have the vision, you have to know the answer, but there's a big chance that you might be wrong, and admitting that in front of your team and asking for help, being open and vulnerable about the process, it was very important to me, and like really breaking out of this idea of like, no, the film is in my head and it's right. It's like, no, wait, the film in my head is one thing. Maybe it's not the best idea for what it could become something more, right? So like just admitting that, like being vulnerable and open about that is like, no, that may be wrong, so let's find another path. Really changing, that moment really changed my point of view on like, oh no, I think this job requires a great amount of vulnerability and being willing to like fail sometimes and make mistakes, and then trust your team to help you find another way.
Yeah, I agree. It goes back to the trust and building confidence, so that people can come up with, or your team can come up with, ideas that are not what you would have thought of. And that's, comedy, drama, suspense, all comes out of surprise, really. And, happy accidents come out of failing sometimes. So to produce, a show or a scene that's funny or suspenseful or surprising, it takes people to pitch ideas and work off of each other. And it's not as easy as just, doing it yourself, I think. That's why collaboration is almost always, I've found for me, has always been much more successful and fun and enjoyable than just telling what to do and how to do it.
Yeah, I personally, came, like one of my personal struggles, especially coming from like an independent art making sphere and that sort of practice, to this more collaborative, like industry-based one where, sometimes there's just a lot more resources up in the air that must be juggled or thought with or dealt with. And so I think personally going from like that one mode of directing and how to work with teams and the amount of preparation that might go into a short film or feature film, I really struggled with adapting that into modes of production that are more constantly moving, like a TV show is, where it really is like people's like full-time jobs for like their life, essentially. You finish one, you begin the other. And so I found like in the former field, there would be a lot of focus on kind of building more exacting maps to like lead people. And I feel like with the amount of time that you have in like those independent spheres, that made sense, as well as just sort of the formal qualities of how you author like those pieces. They kind of more come from individuals in a lot of scenarios. So when I came to animation, that didn't work anymore. Just out of time, and it was a lot of pressure on myself I put to make that same amount of preparation, or those same forms of preparation and senses of knowing, and it just wasn't sustainable, and it was so much more extra labor than I think like Ana and Colleen are suggesting, just like looking out to the people around you and the things that they might be able to bring from the conceptual period onwards. And so I tried to adopt a completely different stance, in which of having all of the answers and a map, coming to the table saying, I know nothing, I don't know anything, I don't know the way forward, and more promoting that like, hey, but I know this world, I know this land we're on, I know what's in it, I know how to traverse it, let's go together. I just find by just like motivating people that like, oh, I don't know the answers, it's also nice because it kind of lets them know that like, it's okay if you don't know the answers either, and gives them agency to explore and really find their own art within whatever we're making. So yeah, it's been a great turnaround formally for me. It's made a lot.
That would be really empowering, for your team to hear that and know that, and just the difference in what you get presented with the artwork and the storyboards or the design that they're creating is going to be, they'll feel confident to show you something that maybe you're not expecting.
Totally.
And
which is so beautiful. It's like so much fun.
Instead of typical, instead of, as exactly as scripted, like I was saying earlier, all of those things, let's face it, this industry has been around for a long time, and these stories have been told again and again and again, and if we can find ways to bring freshness to it, then let's build on that. Let's do that and give people feel like they can bring those odd ideas and do things in a different way.
Totally.
And to that point, we talked a lot about, technical skills today, or things that, you did at the beginning of your career. What are some of the more non-traditional skills that people might not think that they could be a director because they didn't do all the things that you all did, or explored as children, or had this appetite early in life? Like, what are but they do want to explore it now. What are some of the non-traditional skills that you think help make a good director?
I think for me it always goes back to trust, and because trusting and being open and vulnerable and curious, all those things, when you show that to the people that you're working with, your team, it kind of builds confidence in themselves if they know that they can trust you. So I think, those are some qualities, as well as I found that I need to be a good listener. Listening is a good quality to have as a director.
Yeah, I can see that. Anyone else have ideas about non-traditional skills that might help a budding director kind of think about stepping up to the job?
I'd say if you have an uncontrollable imagination, that's a good sign that you might be right for the work. Listening is so big. I think being vulnerable, not just out of like the points that like we talked out of, but I think, just all artists need to be vulnerable so that they can like identify like what ideas they're trying to express in their work. And that I think that's pretty much it. I honestly think that anyone who wants to make a film or be a director can do it and find their own way. I
would echo what my colleagues are saying, absolutely. Also, I think it doesn't hurt to work on soft skills these days. It's very important to learn like how to talk to people, how to approach people, how writing notes. Sometimes like it's these are small things, right, that we can, it doesn't have much to do with the art, but it has to do with our human approach and how we deal with teams. And so I think most of us come from artist backgrounds, and we tend to be a little bit more shy, a little bit more introverted. So it's a good exercise to just grab a few, I don't know, TED Talks here and there.
Be on a panel.
Be on the panel, talk to people that work with leadership and more group-involved things, just to get a little bit of a grasp of those soft skills, because those can take you a long way, like how to communicate your ideas. It's very, very important when you're in a director role. Communication is really key.
Absolutely.
I think just to bounce off that for a moment, and going off this sort of like theme of compassionately directing or bringing models of compassion into these atmospheres or these industries, I think it's like just really good to be curious, and really good to be curious about what people do. And in order to make efforts, not just about how they as individuals approach work and then how you can have fruitful collaboration and understanding them more, but the nature of the work and the weight of the labor of their work. Being curious about these kinds of things will just benefit everybody. It'll benefit the expression, it'll benefit people and how they're working, and that'll all benefit the director eventually as well. Yeah.
I also wanted to touch a little bit on how do we bring more inclusive people into this industry and the leadership and director roles. So are there any ways that you wish, or any programs you wish you could have participated in to help your entry into the industry be easier? And are there any things that you're working on with other organizations or just on your own to help uplift more voices into this industry so we can have more representation on screen of the world that reflects that we live in front and behind the camera? Any thoughts there on what programs you wish you could have seen or been a part of, or things that we still need in the industry that people should, initiatives to bring up different types of people into the industry?
I think, well, I don't know if it's not a program, but I was just thinking about how the studio that you're working with needs to support you when you are dealing with a client and you have suggestions to make programming more inclusive or diverse. They need to get behind you and support you when you make those comments or suggestions to scripts or color styling in characters and that sort of thing. I think that would be helpful, and that's what I've experienced at this studio that we're working at Kickstart. And it might be the first studio that I've had that experience, where normally they don't think about that as something we should be commenting on, but I think that's where it could start, by addressing those things, even though that's not my job. That's not what I've been hired to do. I'm not the writer, but I think if that has been overlooked in a script, then I should feel comfortable pointing that out.
So in content, for sure. And then what about initiatives that you potentially could have been a part of? Are there any out there that you've seen, or do you think there's still a dearth of programs that bring people up into this industry from other underrepresented communities or backgrounds? Because if we don't have, like we talked about earlier, if we don't have those people in the room or writing the scripts or directing the projects, then we're not gonna, see the diversity of storytelling that we all know exists out there. So how do we bring that more into the stories that not only we're we're telling, through the client director relationship, but just in general in the industry, like how do we support creators of non-traditional backgrounds,
Mentoring.
or were there,
Mentoring for sure.
yeah,
I think there should be mentoring programs in every studio. Otherwise, the same people will just be doing the same work. Yeah, there has to be a concerted effort, to do that and create that environment
absolutely
in every studio.
I think, there's definitely an element of uncontrollability, as it is one of those unfortunate things which just is up to a few individuals. But things that we can do, maybe to spur more thoughts of change in those sorts of individuals, is just working together as artists within studios to just really support the people around us who might come from underrepresented communities or backgrounds that want to be directors, really as a team sort of helping people get noticed within the community or within the studio. I think there's also quite a few women directors or directors from underrepresented groups around, but more just in out of industry fields, more in independent art practices and stuff like that. And I think that has a lot to do with just some of the unwelcoming or just unwelcome attitude that can exist for those sorts of groups in industry based environments. So I think there's a possibility of looking out for these people, trying to look outside of the industry, looking outside of the immediate job pool of people, and seeing where these artists are and whether there's opportunities to support their practices, or if, see if they are interested in having a practice within the industry. I think it's also a bit up to us in our own independent spheres or independent projects to build these models or these ideals as much as possible. It's sort of one of those tricky bit of works where you're just hoping to inspire a future almost, as opposed to make a big direct immediate change. And so the ways I do that, for example, is when running independent productions, live action and animation stuff, I personally put a big focus on hiring trans people or people from gender diverse backgrounds, as that is a very underrepresented group in the moving image medium, in hopes that either that moves their practice along to find space within the industry in a more secure career format, or just perpetuates future possibilities and consideration for these sort of artists existing in the space that they might need to survive.
Yeah, great.
Nice.
I think there's got to be advertising for or some sort of promotion of programs like mentoring programs, because I've asked, and I don't know if you have as well, asked colleagues why didn't you apply for the job? And they say, oh, I didn't think that I had everything I needed to have. I didn't think I had all the skills. I didn't think I have everything that I need to know. And if people don't know that, you don't have to know everything. You can rely on your team. You can be collaborative. How can those people be encouraged to apply for the job if they don't know that they're going to be supported and they don't know that that's even a possibility?
Yeah, I agree. I think opening up the conversation is already, it's a small step, but sometimes it means a big step, especially, referring to mentorship inside a studio or after school programs they have too. But just making sure that we are telling people that there is a supportive environment, there is safe places for you to develop skills and learn the role. Making sure inside the studio too there's a communication here. Colleen mentors me. I get to knock on her on her virtual door and hey, please help. And just having more of this creative, supportive environment is already a huge change. But of course, like, I feel the word is really not getting out there, that there is room for everybody. And yeah, exactly. If you're not right, if you don't feel right or ready for the job, it's okay.
Totally.
None of us do.
When you look around, the people who have those jobs are the people who have the belief in themselves to speak up and say, oh, I have an idea.
Yeah.
Oh, this could be funny. Why don't we do this? And they just pipe up and step up. But I think in order for somebody who is underrepresented or doesn't feel like they fit or doesn't feel like they know everything they need to know, that's the one thing that's needed is building of confidence, and those kind of programs, mentoring programs, inside studios as well as maybe in schools. Yeah.
I think dispelling of those myths is what we did today, and I want to thank you all for sharing your stories and your path and everything that goes into your life as a director. And I'm just so excited to have had this discussion, and I want to thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sweet. Thanks.
Thanks.